what is ethics. Ethics is that branch of philosophy that seeks to explore right and wrong, to name what good is. What sort of thing is good? Is it something that exists naturally in the world? Is it only in our minds and our emotions, or is it something else? Then it seeks to extract moral principles by which we should live, based on what we think good is. And then it seeks to apply those moral principles to specific moral cases, like moral dilemmas or social issues like abortion and euthanasia. Ethics is fundamentally the exploration of the world, seeking to find out if we can know what is right and what is wrong. Side note, some philosophers seek to distinguish between moral and ethical. Essentially, in the history of ethics, the two words have not been used in significantly different ways. Most ethicists or moral philosophers use the two terms interchangeably, so I'll do the same in this video. See, I said it was a side note, so it's because I was looking at the side.
Not funny!
Ethical inclinations can be said to arise from three different sources, perhaps more than three, but at least these three. First, ethical inclinations arise from empathy. We feel for others, and thus we sense that we have a responsibility to care for them. I know what it's like to get hurt. Aww. So I have a feeling I know what someone else is going through when they are hurt. Aww. And that makes me care for them. Aww. From this experience, we start to use the concept of ought and should. We don't just say, I feel like caring for them. We say, I ought to care for them. And that's an ethical statement. Some evolutionary biologists say this is where all morality comes from. Secondly, ethical inclinations might come from social contracts that arise when people live together. I agree not to punch you in the nose if you agree not to punch me in the nose. We agree that there will be punishments if anyone goes punching anyone else in the nose. Thus we have again arrived at some ethical oughts and shoulds, or shouldn't. You shouldn't punch me in the nose, or else you'll get arrested. Some philosophers believe that ethical inclinations arise from objective moral facts. They believe that moral facts exist in the world irrespective of our feelings about them, either because God has an opinion on the matter, you ought or you should, or because moral facts exist the way the color yellow exists. They are real things independent of human opinion or feeling. Human beings have some sense of what these facts are through a moral faculty that perceives these facts, an intuition of sorts, just like eyesight perceives yellowness. Some philosophers deny that moral facts exist at all, saying that ethics is just a human creation. We may not think that much about ethical issues until something forces us to. Ethical questions often arise from moral dilemmas. When certain ethical values conflict with other ethical values, we have to decide which ethical values take precedence over others. That's called a moral dilemma. And we may not think much about what our ethical principles are until we're in the middle of one. These can come from lived experience, like should I have an abortion?
No.
Or from moral thought experiments designed to make us think about our ethical principles. Like, if a trolley car is about to kill 5 people unless you pull a lever and save them, but kill someone else, should you? What about pushing some obese guy off a bridge to stop the trolley?
No.
Ethical studies can be divided into 3 major categories. First, metaethics, which talks about what good and evil really are. Is good just the maximizing of human happiness? Is each human life innately good? Is pleasure what is good, or is beauty what is good? Are all ethical impulses just subjective feelings? Is evil a deprivation of good, or is evil really a thing in and of itself? Oh, it's a thing. Secondly, normative ethics, which analyzes specific ethical principles and how they are decided upon. If we face a moral dilemma, what morals should we appeal to? Thirdly, applied ethics, which takes the moral principles of normative ethics and uses them to address moral issues, such as crises in society. This is what we think of when we talk about ethical debates. How should we stand on abortion, euthanasia, questions of medical ethics, privacy, and government? Notice we tend to get caught up in applied ethics when we wrangle over hot social debates, which forces us to get a little speculative and start working on normative ethics. Only really deep, abstract people get to the question of what good really is. Or if you're a parent and you have a 3-year-old who won't stop asking you why, you regress back into the most basic primary statements that might get you close to metaethics. Why? Because there's ultimately good, and if there is no good, then there's no value, and so life is not valuable. Why? Well, it just existentially is. It has to be, so there must be good. Why? Do you want me to push you in front of a trolley? So the juiciest part of ethical conversation really comes from normative ethics. What normative principles are we going to use when we debate one another on hot issues? And if our normative principles conflict with one another, how do we decide which one wins? Because of this, there are many schools of ethical thought. I'll name just a few of them. First, virtue ethics. Many ancient Greek philosophers talked about the concept of happiness, which they called eudaimonia. And by that, they meant becoming completely filled by becoming exactly the thing you are designed to be. They weren't that concerned about who designed you, but they believed very much that human beings had a design which, if lived out correctly, would make us happy. You have a purpose. That purpose is your, in the Greek, telos. And just as the telos of an acorn is an oak tree, the telos of a human being is a human being functioning perfectly and virtuously so as to fulfill eudaimonia, to achieve eudaimonia. As your therapist likes to tell you, you just be the best you that you can be. That will be $150. The way to become the best you is to live virtuously, which means living by virtues, like bravery and nobility. Although the definition of virtue gets a bit sticky. Aristotle famously said that it's feeling the right way at the right time, on the right occasion, towards the right people, for the right purpose, and in the right manner, in the right amount. So, yeah. Virtues are sort of a temperate middle between two extremes. You can't be too brave because that would be rash, or not enough brave because that would be cowardly. But just the right amount of brave is virtuous. It's sort of the Goldilocks ethical philosophy. Virtue ethics sort of made a comeback in the latter half of the 20th century, but it did not get a better definition. Secondly, deontology. This means committing to a principle that you've decided is right, and because it's your duty to do so, fulfilling that principle in all circumstances. And the rightness of your action will be measured in your faithfulness to your duty, regardless of the consequences. After the Greeks, Jesus came along and said, "This is what God up in heaven says is the best thing to do, so you better do it." And Christians who try to obey Jesus are exercising deontological judgment. You can be a deontologist without being explicitly religious, though. Immanuel Kant said that the heart of ethics is a universal statement, known as a categorical imperative, about what is right, and one way to state that is to say, only do what you would want everyone doing in the same circumstances. That's the one rule, now obey it. Thirdly, consequentialism. Consequentialism teaches that the only thing that matters are the consequences of an action. For instance, let's say I see someone about to be hit by a bus, so I go running out in the street to save them. However, I trip, causing both them and me to fall and be run over by the bus, and then the bus crashes, killing the driver. Did I do the right thing? A virtue ethicist would say probably yes, because I acted from virtuous motives. A deontologist would also say yes if they argued that I was obeying a moral principle that I hold about trying to save someone in need. But the consequentialist is going to tell you absolutely not. The consequences were terrible, so the action was immoral. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a book called The Prince in 1532, instructing Italian lords to go ahead and do whatever it takes to ensure peace in the land. If it means killing off your enemy's entire family so his children don't rise up against you, go ahead and do it. Sure, it's near genocide, but if Italy gets to live in peace after that, it was moral. You will also see consequentialism in other great works of philosophy, like Game of Thrones, where virtually every character is a consequentialist. We should note that the most prominent form of consequentialism is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism was developed largely by Jeremy Bentham and his student John Stuart Mill in the 19th century. They agreed that the consequences were all that mattered to ethical decisions, but the best consequence to aim for was the maximum amount of happiness in the world. Anything that maximizes happiness is moral. There are lots of challenges to be posed, like how exactly do you measure happiness? And does only human happiness count? Or do we count all the happy pigs in the equation? And what if having a small subclass of human beings who have to do really terrible slave labor for the rest of us actually creates more happiness than if they weren't doing it? Overall happiness is maximized, but in a way that seems kind of terrible. Now, another subclass, Emotivism, holds that all ethical statements are ultimately just statements about feelings. When I say murder is bad, what I'm actually saying is I really, really don't like murder. Let's stop all the murdering because it scares me. Let's not murder anybody, especially me. Please stop planning to murder me now. Emotivism is not really a strain of normative ethics because it doesn't have any principles. It's a form of metaethics because it's describing what moral good really is. Just your own stupid subjective feelings, which I don't have to care about if I don't want to. So as a result, one strain of normative ethics is the rejection of normative ethics. No principles should actually hold because good is not really a thing. Finally, the fourth real strain of normative ethics that I'm going to talk about today is called contractualism. Contractualism is a strain of normative ethics that says whatever set of rules you and I agree to are what we have. If there is no fundamental good, we can just agree on a compromise between your preferences and mine. Until I murder you, I mean. And then whose preferences come first? Mine, because I killed you. Ethics is one of the most fascinating and useful areas of philosophy. We're all wrapped up in ethical commitments and decisions, whether or not we've taken time to really think about it. And perhaps, if we think about them, we may realize that we want to change our ethical positions and change our worldviews because of our thoughts about ethics. Philosophy can really make you do that. And so we all ought to philosophize. You see what I did there? I used ought because ethics is all about what you ought to do.
Not funny!
Hey, this is Jim. Are you a college sophomore taking Introduction to Philosophy and finding it very confusing? No worries. Just put the book they're making you read or the essay they're making you write in the comments, and maybe I'll make a video about it, and then you won't have to do your homework. Why should you have to do homework? This isn't high school. Go live your best life now.